She stood quietly near the dining table, nervously adjusting the sleeves of her simple cotton dress. The smell of expensive perfume, clinking cutlery, and forced smiles filled the room. Her parents, dressed in their finest clothes, sat across from her, cold eyes tight-lipped, barely looking at their daughter. For years, they had reminded her that she was nothing special, that her soft voice and humble ways would never bring her success. And now, even in her own home, they treated her like a burden, a mistake they wished they could erase. Her father cleared his throat and glanced around the luxurious living room, trying hard to hide his discomfort. "All this," he said with a slight sneer, "doesn't change where you came from." Her mother nodded in silent agreement, sipping her tea as if the very act of being here was exhausting. Their words weren't loud, but they cut deep. She'd invited them to share a meal, hoping for warmth, for family. Instead, they looked at her like an outsider who'd gotten lucky, not someone they were proud of. What they didn't know was that her quiet strength had carried her through more storms than they could imagine. That her journey from a small town girl with dreams to the wife of one of the country's most powerful billionaires was not some accident. It was earned every step of the way. But still, in this moment, they saw only the girl they used to control, to mock. Then, the front door opened. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, firm, steady, unmistakably confident. Her parents froze, glancing toward the sound. The air shifted, and, just as her father opened his mouth to say something cruel, the man they had only heard about but never truly believed existed stepped into the room. Tall, calm, sharp, her husband. What he said next silenced the room, but that moment changed everything. He walked in without rushing, his eyes scanning the room with quiet confidence. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, not a single detail out of place, he gave off an energy that made people sit up straighter without knowing why. Her mother's teacup clinked slightly against the saucer. Her father, always quick to talk, suddenly had nothing to say. For the first time in years, they looked uncertain, maybe even nervous. But she didn't speak. She stood still, watching him approach, her hands gently clasped in front of her. She knew what this moment meant. For years, she had listened to her parents compare her to other smarter cousins, wealthier neighbors, anyone but her. They had told her not to aim too high, to stay in her place, to marry someone normal. So when she met him, this man with vision, patience, and an empire behind him, they had laughed it off, told her it wouldn't last, that he'd leave once he saw the real her. They never saw the nights she spent supporting his late meetings, managing household staff, balancing charity work and quiet business ideas of her own. They didn't know she helped him through one of the worst financial downturns of his life, not with money, but with belief, real love, real partnership. But none of that mattered to them. To her parents, she was still the girl with too many dreams and not enough worth. He stood beside her now, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. He looked directly at her father and asked, "Is this how you speak to your daughter in her own home?" Silence, the kind that makes the walls seem closer. She looked down, heart pounding not from fear, but something else. Because deep inside, she knew this moment was only the beginning of a truth they were not ready to face. Her father shifted in his seat, clearing his throat again, but this time, his voice didn't come so easily. Her mother forced a smile, the kind that barely touched the eyes. "We were just talking," she said quickly, her tone light, almost too light. But the tension in the room didn't ease. It thickened. Her husband didn't raise his voice or show anger. He didn't have to. His presence alone said everything. She felt a mix of emotions stirring inside her: anger, sadness, and something heavier. A quiet ache from years of being looked down upon by the people who were supposed to protect her. She had spent her entire childhood trying to earn their approval. Good grades, quiet manners, helping around the house without being asked. Nothing had ever been enough. And now, even standing in a house she helped build, with a man who treated her like gold. They still couldn't see her worth. Her husband's eyes didn't leave her father's face. "You raised a daughter stronger than you realize," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And I see her every single day." Her parents didn't respond. Not really. Her father gave a forced chuckle and muttered something about everyone having their opinions, while her mother suddenly remembered a call she needed to make. The excuse felt hollow. But they weren't ready to hear the truth, not yet. She turned her gaze away from them. Out the window, where the city lights flickered in the distance. Her heart was beating faster now, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. Maybe it was never about proving anything to them. Maybe it was about finally letting go of the need to. But just as she thought the moment might pass, her father said something that changed everything again. Her father leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the edge of the table. His expression had shifted, no longer smug, but calculated. "You think just because you married into money, you're above us now?" he said, his voice low, almost daring. The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp and bitter. Her mother didn't stop him this time. She just sat there, eyes down, fingers tightly gripping her purse. She felt her stomach twist. She had been ready for passive comments, maybe a few cold glances, but this was different. This was her father, looking her in the eye and questioning her life, her choices, her worth, again, and in front of her husband, who had never once made her feel small. Her husband didn't flinch. He remained standing beside her, his silence more powerful than any raised voice. But the room itself felt like it was closing in. The polished walls, the gold-framed portraits, the elegant decor seemed to shrink under the weight of old wounds being reopened. She wanted to speak, to say something that would break the decades-long cycle of guilt and shame. But no words came. Instead, her father kept going, saying how she had always been too soft, too naive. That this life, this mansion, the influence, the respect was borrowed, not earned. That one day it could all disappear, and she'd come crawling back. Her heart was pounding now, not just from anger, but from the fear that maybe, deep down, they would never see her for who she really was. Not the little girl they tried to shape, but the woman she'd become. And then, in the middle of her father's final sentence, her husband calmly walked over to the glass cabinet. He opened it slowly, pulled something out, and placed it gently on the table in front of them. Her parents stared at it, and in that moment, their faces changed completely, but what they saw was only the beginning. Their eyes locked onto the object on the table. First, it looked like nothing special. A thick, sealed envelope with a gold emblem pressed into the corner. Her father leaned forward, frowning, as if trying to read it without touching it. Her mother's hand hovered in the air for a second before pulling back, unsure. She stayed quiet, her breath caught in her chest. She had no idea what her husband had placed there. His calm expression hadn't changed, but she noticed the slight tension in his jaw, rare thing, and always a sign that something serious was coming. Finally, her father reached out and opened the envelope, his brows furrowed. His mouth parted, just slightly. "What is this?" he muttered, flipping through the papers. Her mother leaned in, and the color slowly drained from her face. There was confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, something much deeper, fear. Her husband looked at them, voice steady. "It's everything. Financial records, property transfers, a trust fund, and details of the business you tried to hide." Her heart skipped. "Business?" Her husband turned to her gently. "They never told you, did they?" he said quietly, "about the money they kept, the land your grandfather left behind, or the name they registered under her name, your name, before selling it off behind closed doors." She felt her knees weaken. Her father dropped the papers onto the table, the sound sharp and final. "That has nothing to do with now," he snapped. "But—" His voice had lost its usual power. Her mother looked away. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd thought. All those years, they'd treated her like the family burden, while hiding the fact that she was the legal heir too. Something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. And just as she tried to process it, her husband added one final line. "There's one more thing you should know, something I found last week." About the deed. Everything went still, and then knock. Knock, someone was at the door. The knock echoed through the room like a drumbeat, cutting through the heavy silence. Her father froze mid-breath. Her mother's eyes darted to the door, then back to the papers scattered across the table. Her husband didn't move. He simply looked at her, giving a small nod as if to say, "It's time." She walked to the door slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. When she opened it, a woman in a dark blazer stood outside, holding a black folder. She introduced herself politely as a legal representative. "I'm here regarding the inheritance claim filed under Ms. Ariba's name," she said clearly. "We've concluded the investigation. And based on new documents retrieved from land archives last week, the disputed property is rightfully hers. The transfer will begin today." Her parents shot up from their chairs. "What claim?" "Her father snapped, stepping forward. The woman didn't.